All right. Good morning. Good morning. Fantastic. Thank you. So good morning, everybody. And a warm welcome to KTH. I am Agneta Rindman, and I'm head of Executive School. And we do learnings for key people on how to capture opportunities in changing business landscapes. This morning we do it in the format of a breakfast seminar on the theme More Sustainable Solutions from Digital Technology. So at Executive School, we, as many others, have been struggling on how to tackle the sustainability challenges. And we came up with a curriculum 10 years ago. And like everybody else, we were not all that successful. And now we think that this approach, very pragmatic on how to capture business opportunities brought by digital technology, could be a way forward. So we're very happy to welcome Dennis Pamlin to this morning's session. And we should be done in about an hour. So a big hand for Dennis.
Thank you very much. And well, I introduced myself first, but yeah, I just wanted to reflect because I had to go back about 20 years into history when I saw this title of the presentation, because I did one that was almost identical to the OCD when I started this journey of trying to merge sustainability with digital. Because I think, when you look at it, it has this smart thing that more sustainable solutions. So is that more in numbers, in terms of number of solutions, or are the solutions more sustainable? And of course, the challenge is that they're both. And I'll come back to that, because that's really been, and I think still is, maybe the most sort of grand challenge when we're trying to merge this. Because compared with many other issues, sustainability tends to be too good in too many things. So it's beyond incremental in one area. If it was only video conferencing being provided, that would have been a huge thing for the world. And it would probably have had greater uptake than we have still today. So this sort of more sustainable solutions, I think, keep that in mind, that is a bit complicated. Because I use that because I thought it was interesting that some people thought about it as more in terms of more solutions, and some people thought about it as more sustainable. There was not enough. And people from the environmental sector was more thinking about maybe it can help us do more things deeper, real sustainability. While people in the business sector thought, oh, it's all this, there are more solutions out there. We need to focus. What is that? So I'll wear 3 hats today, or more, I don't know. One, as I've been doing my own thing, but use different platforms, but I'm also senior advisor at RISE, and I'm an accelerator at digital sustainability at Cybercom. And the 3 things that I'm going to sort of build this around are 3 current initiatives. One is this work that I'm doing with the UNDP, that because many people in the sustainability sector are still living not even in the 21st century or the 20th century. It's like they're living in the, I don't know what century, in terms of how you approach technology. It's always like being a number of steps behind, and it's always reactive. I think that's why we have things like offsetting and all these things. It's like if you do something, then I'll come in and I'll try to sell you something that's not really about what you do, but you look good. So it's driven by communication and lazy thinking to a large extent. We're trying to change that because we can't afford that. The world is crashing down on us right now. So if we're not ahead on bringing sustainability at the forefront to where things are really happening, we're never going to catch up. So that way we do this in terms of what are the disruptive trends coming, and how do we capture those for sustainability, and making sure that from the very beginning. So it's not talking about AI and where are the sustainable applications. It's looking at how do we frame the development of AI so it's developing in the way we want. So because we have so many of these things that we jump on things, it's not like blockchain and then we say, oh, but can there be an application for blockchain for sustainability? How do we frame the whole blockchain developing on sustainability? So that's what we have, and there's a web page for that. If you Google on SDG Trend Scanner, you'll find this, and it's really interesting. Of course, we launched it last year at the high-level political forum in New York. The other thing that I'll sort of frame this around, so this is about, the first one is about trends, more generally, and our need to bring a proactive perspective. The second one is more on the institutional level. 3 years ago in Paris, maybe the most interesting initiative was launched that I can see on the global scale today, and that's mission innovation. For the first time, governments realized that best practice is not enough. If you work in the sustainability sector, you will hear best practice a lot. And that is, again, lazy thinking. The best thing we can do is trying to find the best thing out there. Where is the discussion about next practice? I tend to say that if I'm asked to work with someone and they say, oh, we need best practice, and I say, okay, next. Then you old school sustainability, it's not bad necessarily, but you're not part of leading ideas. You're trying to give companies what best available technology, and that's super lazy, of course. Not unimportant, but it's lazy. But mission innovation said that it's about accelerating the next generation of solutions. Because we had the clean energy ministerials, which was about sharing best practice. But mission innovation was also triggered by business. So on the other side, it's breakthrough energy ventures with Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Jack Ma, Tata, all the billionaires. Even the most conservative billionaires said, why aren't you looking at innovation in the sustainability space? So that's where mission innovation was created. And I'm leading a work there when we have this framework for avoided emissions, basically saying, how do you put things out there that is helping us delivering the society wants? 1.5 compatible solutions. So we say that all emission reductions are not good. Many of them are locking us in things. And again, it's like the International Energy Agency is telling us that. What we call green is very often an incremental improvement in a broken system. And we celebrate that as green. Instead of realizing that that money is locking us in, it's a small reduction, but it's not taking us where we need to go. So this was a recognition of that, and also that we here, where we are in Sweden right now, are sort of masters of that task. And we're so ahead on the proactive thinking. We think, but we're not. When you look at our pension funds, they're still divesting as their climate strategy. They don't have an investment strategy. And many of our leading companies are offsetting, not providing the solutions that we need. So we have a bit of a tension here that we are still in the 70s thinking very much. It's end of pipe, and no, those are not bad, those are needed also. But when we look at where the exciting things are, they're not really on the end of pipe things. So that's a bit of a tension that many of the most exciting things in Sweden tends to not be called green. And I think it's telling that still today, we don't consider Skype and Spotify two of our major important sustainability contributions that have dematerialized, rethinking about ownership within different sectors, how we rethink about how we meet and work. And it's not even considered an environmental export. In our statistical assessment of environmental and sustainability, it's about end-of-pipe technology. So it's built into the system. And then finally, on a very practical level, so it's all very nice, these sort of big frameworks, but how do you do things in reality? So I'm going to wear my Cybercom hat, where we've developed a framework and a process to work with companies to capture digitalization and use sustainability as a drive force for business development. And it's so interesting how difficult that is to get across. Oh, so you want to help us reduce our emissions? No. We want to help you help the world reduce emissions. We want to make sure that your business is part of tomorrow. Not reducing your problems, but helping you expand your opportunities. That's interesting. Is that sustainability? That's very often in Sweden you hear that. Our sustainability manager, his or her task is communication and reporting and risk management. It's not strategic development. And we give, and we're creating a little sort of discussion club around that. So small conferences, prizes are given to those who talk the most or sort of communicate the most and have the best brand, but not those who actually deliver things and who actually make a difference. So it's how you perceive, not what you do. So that, and that's not to say that needs to be bad, but maybe we should have a 20% focus on communication and risk and 80% on delivery. Now we might have 98% of communication, reputation, and risk, and 2% of the real sustainability. And I don't know how much, maybe we can come into discussions afterwards, etc., because it's, of course, a bit sensitive. We have Fossil-Free Sweden in here, very good initiative, but it's also a very conservative initiative, where you ask, based on sectors, the old polluting sectors, and challenge them on how they reduce. So and I was part in a couple of processes where people said that this is actually a bit dangerous because the kind of fossil-free plans that are being developed, the roadmaps, are not innovation-driven. They're risk-driven. We don't see, and the one thing and that's where people said to me that we need to deal with this in some way. We need to bring innovation. And then I asked, what would that be? Well, the problem is that we think supply chain is the material things. So if we build a house now and define sustainability, it's how do we get better cement and how do we get better steel? So we didn't see business model development or digitalization as part of our supply chain or in sustainability. Of course, when you talk about business development, that's a key part, maybe the most important, because that's really shaping how you build your business. So that's where people asked, maybe we should set up a fossil-free roadmap for digitalization companies. How are they actually helping companies to not just do what they do today, slightly better? So that's where we had brought together a team, and I think some of you are here today also, and see how that can happen. But the initial reaction from many was, but are you really emitting that much CO2? Why are you relevant? Okay, no, not that much. But there's huge potential to help people. So why don't we have architects part of that? They don't have a huge sort of impact in terms of emitting a lot of CO2, but they shape the societies we live in, etc., etc. So we don't look at those who really shape society. We look at those who come after and try to do things. And with cars, then we look at, how can you make a better car? Not looking at how do you create a sustainable mobility system. Cars are one part. If you only focus on that, you will have a problem approach. So, and why is that then, this challenge, and why is things happening now? So after 20 years of feeling like you are just shouting in the woods, we have a growing recognition that we have, because this is also, sustainability is so complicated and you need to go all this education. Oh, sorry, of course you need to all go to very much education. But sometimes I think you, but sometimes I think when you talk about sustainability, people tend to complicate things a bit too much. And I think if you look at the fact that we have one planet and soon going to be about 10 or 11 billion people, if you start with that and just ask, is what you do compatible in that situation? You will realize that 80 to 99% of what we do in Sweden is not within this world. It's making the old world slightly less bad, but it will not allow China and India to live a good life when they move out of poverty. So thereby we're sending quite strange signals to the rest of the world. So what we call green, the best examples that many of you might remember, because at least it was discussed, when we said, we're going to move away from fossil car to biofuel cars. Excellent idea. The farming community and the car industry, no one really knows to do anything, and we can call it green. Bam. Okay, in India, that's 1 year of food in each tank. Where's the equation for you to making this add up? Oh, we haven't thought about that because we have lots of biofuel here. Yeah, but that's not how the world looks like. We need to think a bit beyond our borders. So every time you hear that we have lots of bioenergy, be very aware that that might be a strange thing to say. Unless we are thinking like Trump. Let's build borders and just protect this little piece and we create things in here. But if we're thinking we're going to live in a bit more global economy, that might be a dangerous thing to think about. We should think about how much force does the world have? And of course, many of you are young, some of you are old. Those of you who are old, and some of you who are young, will also realize that sustainability is and used to be quite polarized. It was the idea when I came work for WWF and talk about we need major lifestyle changes. Most people took 2 steps back and said, I don't know what cave you're going to put me in, but I'm going to resist. So the idea that lifestyle changes and sustainability was something bad. And of course, I even had those discussions when I said, why don't we have paper that looks nice? No, but then it doesn't look like sustainability. It couldn't look nice because then it wasn't sustainable. It couldn't smell nice because then it wasn't sustainable. The idea was that you need to sacrifice yourself because unless you did that, that wasn't sustainability. And to some extent that was true. We had that challenge. But then came the digital age and everything changed. And I don't think we still understand that because we still have this idea that there's this tension between economic development and sustainability. Our instruments are carbon taxes, environmental labels that make you choose one slightly less bad thing of a version of products, etc. So many of our tools and thinking are still in that world and shape because we really shaped our thinking during the 70s in Sweden. I don't know how many of you, and especially maybe not you who are here in English, but Henrik Schiffert made a brilliant observation, I think, is that people tend to wear the kind of clothing when they thought they were the most popular. So you can see pop star wearing things from the 70s when they were at the highlighted sessions. You grab on to when you're most popular. And I think Sweden has brought on the sustainability from the 70s. When we were the first to embrace end-of-pipe thinking, and we were leading in that. That was important at the time. But I think because we were so successful then, we still feel that it's that's real sustainable. And we want that to be the most important thing. This sort of disruptive thinking with digitalization, oh, it's so difficult. That's not us really. How do we deal then with all our awards, all our celebration of our sustainability heroes that are the people who tell us about the problems and help us offset and make things slightly less bad? What about the Niklas Zennströms and Daniel Ek, etc.? Why aren't they being celebrated? They could be I think they could shape the way that Elon Musk has helped shape the US conversation on what sustainability is about. It's something about excitement. It's something about grabbing the opportunities and providing something. I don't say he's perfect, but it's a huge difference on looking at someone who's trying to sell you offsets and someone who's trying to develop an integrated solution with charging solar panels and electric cars and thinking about how do we rethink the infrastructure we live in. So this is where I think it's interesting. When I started with this and really tried to, when I thought the world was ready, I wrote this book back in 2002 at the World Summit and thought, now we can reshape the world's thinking about sustainability. And we had 4 people in the room. Our media people at WF at that time said, that was interesting. We've never done something that the sustainability people thought was so uninteresting. But people we've never talked to are calling us and asking us to come. So people, of course, from the ICT industry, people from disrupting, innovation, business model people said, but wow, this is interesting. Do you see opportunities? We thought you were about stopping, asking people to pay for protection of land, etc. That's sort of environmental working. And that's where I, coming back to the first slide, that's where I felt that, and we're still there, that the challenge is that it's too good in too many ways. Because people are framed in their old thinking and say, how does that help my forest? How does that help this car? Instead of saying, no, what's the mobility system? Where's the sort of the framing for that challenge? Because you can do the smart city planning, you can build the smart buildings, you can do the smart appliances, etc. So on all different levels. But the major thing is when you bring this together. Not when you look at individual solutions, but when those are brought together. And I think that what Elon Musk has done, and when you look at investors, and even sustainability people say, oh, it's such a great sustainable car producer, and said, no, that's not what I'm doing. I'm looking at the transition to electrification. And that's where the car industry analysts said, why is he bringing an electric company together with a solar panel company? And they were saying that with a straight face. Because in their KPIs and evaluating a car company, nowhere in that equation can you see a solar panel making sense. But of course, most people standing from the outside said, you said what? You can't see any synergies between an electric car and solar panels.
You said what?
Sorry?
What?
Yeah. No, I wasn't that clever, but I'll do that next time. Especially when you have a battery being used as a backup for that system. So that was really fascinating. So that has been a challenge, and I would argue that until maybe 5 years ago, I was sort of wasting my time a little bit, doing a little bit of incremental thing. But then, not thanks to me or anyone else, I think, in the sustainable sector, the conversation changed gradually. Because what we talked about was finally brought up, but not from a sustainability perspective. It was called the fourth industrial revolution. And even the slowest people, those who go to Davos, finally realized that. So, and they realized that about 2 years ago. Of course, everyone here in the room, we stand on the brink. Yeah, Sherlock. We've been on the brink for a couple of decades, but yeah, it's okay. It's good that you, the last ones, come on board as well. But that really, but if you read then the rest, it will alter the way we live, work, relate to each other in scale, scope, and complexity. The transformations will be unlike anything humankind has experienced before. Yeah, of course, the PR people, the last bit. I think the finding fire might have been a bigger thing for humanity, but you can argue about things. Maybe agriculture. But what they did was to shift the conversation that we have not done in Sweden. From change is the normal to business as usual is the normal. Because we used to think business as usual is the normal. Any deviation from that is strange. Now, if you do what you did last year, that's strange. That means that you're not keeping up. So if you do public procurement and you procure the same thing next year, you should be challenged. Why are you doing that? Not the bund trying to do something new, because that should be the normal. And why is that so difficult? I think this image, I know it's horrible and not the way you should present things, but I think it's the best possible way that I find to help people understand why this is, why this is so difficult. And that's because we do the same thing every time we go through this transition. We have a couple of decades when we build up the new foundation for the new economy, the new transition. And then we meet this transition point, the turning point, and then things really change. But the problem is that in this 20, 30 years, people see the potential, the smart people, and they talk about that. So, but then nothing really happens. And when thing happens, it's not really good. So when the turning point happens, people are still surprised. So, and if you look at virtual meetings, if you look at digitalization of books, etc., yeah, we heard that. People have been talking about that. And then they don't see that when things really happen, it tends to happen exponentially. I happen to work with Bonnier, for instance, here in Sweden. E-books, 0.3% of the market. Why should we share? care at all. And then 4 years later, 60% of the market. Never heard about that kind of transition before. Why? Because the crazy bold guy, well, he wasn't bold then, but now, Jeff Bezos, I don't know if you heard about him, he make a little bit of money these days. He thought about, it's not about technology, it's about business model. People are focusing on trying to make the e-paper as good as paper. I don't know how many of you were around that time. That sort of everybody was measuring how you can get the paper in color, the kind of resolution, everything. You use paper as that. And he said, hang on, well, there's something in here. Maybe if people could read the book and at the end, download the book they want, anyone in the world. So maybe it's not about looking at that as a digital book. Maybe it's a new ecosystem we should think about. And he started something that is called Amazon, that went from a bookstore to embracing this. Because he said, and the brightest idea he had was that, why should I tell people what they should read? Because that was what the publishing industry did. And they had this Christmas, we still have that thing, Christmas, that these are the bestsellers, this is what you should read. But he said, what if I should do things like giving people information about what people who read this book also liked? So I'm not part on telling you what to read, but the other people who read this. And you can look at those. Who do I trust? Where should I seek inspiration from? And that, I would argue, was the big thing. He didn't look at the technology. He looked at the customer and said, how can I create a better experience? And that is one of the biggest challenges. I would also argue that, and you think, I feel so clever when I did this, and I presented this, I think big, I think there. And then, of course, I work a lot in China, and then you go there, and every time people, as soon as I feel clever, I go there and they get a reality check. Because then they say, yeah, but it's not the fourth industrial revolution. We are leaving 336 years of industrialization behind. We are entering a new era. And in China now they talk about eco-civilization. If you Google around that and try to look at what China is trying to grasp and saying, what's beyond when you have a world that is not struggling with scarcity, where growth is today, when we have, it was a couple of, I think it's about 1.5 decades ago, when more people started to die of obesity than undernutrition. And you have that in multiple fields now. And of course, where 150,000 years of civilization, or wherever you want to draw the line, have been focused on scarcity, and people have been dying because of too little medicine, too much exposure to nature, etc. When all of a sudden you get too much of things, it really messes things up. And it's not about growth. It's so much deeper than that. It's the way we relate to each other. It's the way we have symbols of prestige. Everything has been sort of circled around the fact that we wanted to survive. And scarcity was there. And now the need for survival is being threatened by being provided too much. So I think this idea, what we do then, and that makes, of course, this time even more exciting. Because if it's not the fourth industrial revolution, but a transition to an eco-civilization instead, what are the implications for that? And that's why that's why I accept these kind of things also, because I feel it's important for us to realize that we seldom give ourselves the time to think beyond the incremental, to take a step back and ask, where are we in history? And really go to China, not to think that China might be sort of our saving grace for some of our old companies that we can export some non-sustainable goods to, but maybe be inspired by how they frame things and how they think about it. That's not to say that China is perfect. There are huge problems there, as everywhere. We have presidents on the planet right now that I think you could not even have imagined being there a couple of days ago, I was going to say, but years ago at least. But I think that's important, because then if you think about this transition and turning point, I think it's exciting to be alive today and just thinking about what will the next 20, 30 years bring. Because we've been thinking and working like this for at least 150 years. And even if we just look at the fourth industrial revolution, we can start imagining this. So when we talk about a carbon tax, that can move this within that. But if we're going to try to direct and understand these kind of transitions, we need to rethink our policy tools, our relation to change, what is, how do we make sure that people are not being felt left behind? Because I think that's, from us working with sustainability, that's one of our biggest mistakes. That we don't have visions where people are on board. We talk about digitalization, AI, Internet of Things, and it's very hard for most people to say, where am I in this? And when they hear about those, it's usually because, sorry, your work does no longer exist. We have now a smarter solution, so we don't need you anymore. So when more and more people feel that this transition, these exciting opportunities, is not related to me getting a better life and things going in the right direction, it's giving a few people on the planet a lot more resources while not really solving any of the big problems, you get tension in societies. And that's where I think standing on the side then screaming about offsetting, sorry, I'm talking about offsetting too much, but I think it's just a symbol of being so far out and so disconnected that be a leader, buy our offsets. And then, okay, but how does that really shape tomorrow's society? Yeah, it's nice feeling less bad about your flight and thinking, is it better to do that than nothing? That's the argument. Yeah, maybe. Because maybe that gets you a little bit less pressure on thinking, what's the alternative? As an entrepreneur, I feel, how do I create a new app for offsetting, instead of thinking, how can people meet in the future in a sustainable way? So how do we create pressure and not avoiding the fact that this is difficult? It's not simple. I like that John Elkington, who coined this triple bottom line and triple win, said that might have been the worst idea ever. Because changes has consequences. And if we think that, and if you talk about triple wins, you tend to focus on those today. Because those are the ones who screams if they lose something. You don't look at the winners of tomorrow, who do not exist yet. So how do you deal with that? And I think also for us, sometimes just to remind ourselves, this is from the report I wrote about the avoided emissions framework and why we needed new thinking on creating incentives. And I just try to help people understand that even within climate, that is a recent issue. In '92, when many of the framework was created, the world was so different, even through these years. By that time, 14 of the 20 largest companies on Fortune 500 were fossil fuel companies. We had people, I don't know if people remember Kyoto. When I was there, it was just fascinating to see how the fossil fuel companies were just really obstructing and stopping and not questioning everything. And then we said, let's report about the transparency in big polluters. Let's try to make some tools that can challenge that. But then we keep those tools in a world where those companies are moving away. They're still vocal, and some of them, but most of them are not. Most of them are actually trying to get something to happen now. It's a fundamental shift. Now it's only 2 of the 20 largest companies that are doing this. But you also have 5 of those that are actually pursuing sustainability in different ways. So it's such a different world, but we still have the tools for yesterday. But we do understand that. When you ask people internationally who are the leaders, it's not the big polluters who are doing less. It's not the Dow Chemicals or, can't read that, British Petroleum, Shell. Those were the ones who were seen as sustainability leaders, who was trying to do something bad, less bad. But now we look at Interface, IKEA, Tesla as the leaders. Those who are trying to think, what do we give to society? How do we help doing that? I don't say those are perfect companies, but it's sometimes called do the less harm era of leadership to the sustainable growth of era leadership. So really, am I looking the world going to look the same and I'm trying to do less bad? Or am I trying to help the world moving in that direction? And if you look at it from a company's perspective, of course, everything about relevance is when you talk about where are we heading? Where are we moving in this? And when I look for leadership and really interesting thinking, I very seldom find that among the sort of sustainability think tanks and people working with sustainability. It's people like the FTSE Russell, the London Stock Exchange. They define companies in 3 categories. Those who do the ESG, that's 99% of Swedish sustainability work, to combine with some CO2 reductions. But then they look at LC, those who create tomorrow's society. So what they basically say is that what the ESG is doing is looking at the old industrial structure and try to make sure that that doesn't destroy too much. LC, low carbon revenues or sustainable revenues, green revenues. So they do this differentiation in sort of the risk perspective and the revenue perspective. Do you make your money? Is that associated? If you grow and sell more things, does the world become a better place? And that's what they look at. And that's a conversation I hope we can have here, because that's when digitalization is everywhere. Because if you're going to do that, if you're going to sell more things, and things not being physical things, but ideas and solutions, you need digital framework around those. And just to, I think, making the distinction between business sustainability 1.0, which is the old one when we just said, oh, maybe it's possible to do everything we do today, but look at the fact that we sometimes do stupid things. And then say, oh, that was good. You saved some money. You wasted money before, now you didn't waste money. That's a great first step. Then you started to say, there might be some room to maneuver here. What we do might be able to if we take consideration, and you said this, it's quite associated with lock-in. It's usually when you say, oh, maybe I can charge a little bit more for this if I call it green to small group of people in society. Usually women between 25 to 45 tend to be the prime suspect in this group. But you might do like Vattenfall did, sell green electricity to that group, premium, and then take that money and invest in coal in Poland. And sort of say, okay, that's an interesting business model called sustainability, or not. But what we talk about now, 3.0, that's the exciting things. It's about saying, what the society needs, and how do I give that? And that's a fundamental difference, because it's not looking at sustainability as something, and here I am, and that's set. And then I try to fit sustainability into that. I start with the need in society and say, how do I respond to that? How do I become a solution? How do I give people good health care? How do I give people sustainable mobility? Not how can I improve the way I do it today, but how is the sustainability made sustainable for tomorrow? And I think that's the real conversation that we need to have, is how do we, and I don't say that all companies need to do that, but a little bit of the balance. How much do we focus on companies that are 3.0, and how much do we celebrate 1.0 and 2.0 companies? And if we do that, are we clear that they are 1.0 or 2.0 companies? I'll skip that. I'll just mention the fact that it's, I'll keep this, because I guess this will be uploaded something, so you can keep that in mind. It's just, you can have that little bit of a test with your own thinking, how you relate to climate change. Because the more reactive you are, the further to, well, now I'm starting to talk about it anyway. So if you're the most reactive person on the planet, you can't really be more reactive than saying, let's keep on doing everything we do. And then we find another technology solution with geoengineering. We change the atmosphere, or we send things into space that block sunlight. So that was sort of, and sometimes people here in Sweden will laugh about that, but in the US that's sort of, well, that's the appropriate response. Of course, you just add another layer of technology solutions for that. But yeah, the next one is sucking down carbon. Of course, that's important. And you can see who is talking about that as being important. Usually the same people who used to say that nothing was nothing was possible, and now they take the next step. And then you talk about CCS being absolutely necessary. That's the same people usually who don't want to do anything to their business models, because it's very comfortable to do that. But then I'm provocative. Then you have the people who talk about 100% renewable. Equally not very clever. Of course we need 100% renewable, but if you don't talk about smart solutions, we will not have a planet, because there's not enough growing biomass or places to put all these things if we are as stupid to provide solutions as we are today. So how do we do that? Where do you start on this? And where do you see messaging in the society coming about? And what is interesting is that even the IPCC used to be on the 100% renewable and CCS, because they did the old modeling thing. And it was only now, with the 1.5 degrees, when they realized there is no chance for any business as usual, when they developed the P1 scenario. Please remember this, and please do what you can do to make Sweden, wherever you live, P1, the reference scenario. Because P1 is where you don't need any CCS. And it's possible to get to 1.5 even with that. Of course, we can have that as a backup. But if you start looking at being smart to start with, asking how can people eat, get nutrition? How can you have mobility? Instead of saying, how do we make this infrastructure that we have today and change that from backside? That's when you need all the CCS. That's when you need all the technology. We might need that anyway. I'm not saying I'm against that, but it's just that when you focus that, you tend to miss the really exciting stuff. So now we have a situation where this is happening. So I'll end by just sort of have a few funny slides and give an example from Cybercom that I think is really interesting. It's of course that we have this idea that we like to talk about innovation and leadership. But as I said, at the same time we like to talk about best practice. So we had this idea that everybody wants change, we want innovation, etc. But when we talk about it, who actually wants to do that? And who wants to lead that? And that's next practice. You almost get an empty room. So maybe you were fooled into this room thinking that this was going to be about the traditional sustainability, but so you can leave later, but that's a thing. And I think that's also used with the fact that we're trying to sell this as too easy of a thing. This is a graph that is just, some people think that it's not really relevant at all, but many people start saying maybe there is something. And in order to get your CEO or whoever it is to accept this, you try to sell it as so easy as possible. So as soon as things becomes a bit more difficult, people then give up and start, well, you might get what I'm going to say then, what kind of solutions you can sort of cling on to as a simple solution. But you don't really look at the transition because it is difficult. And as long as we are selling the sustainable transition as something easier, I think we'll lose that. I think we need to make it as part of the fourth industrial revolution, to orientate yourself in a very complicated world. So I'd just like to come back then to this concrete work with Cybercom and end with that, because it's really about looking at what do companies relate to and what do they really do. And we use this with a bunch of traditional companies in the steel, cement, etc. Part of the world. And what they did was to say, how can we make a new bridge, Öresundsbron? And of course, the first thing is to make a physical bridge with zero carbon material. That would be the sort of let's call it the Swedish approach. But then start saying, okay, but what is that? That, of course, a simple thing. But what if we start looking at a physical bridge that is zero carbon, but also support a zero carbon infrastructure? Because, of course, the major impact of that bridge is not the bridge itself, it's what kind of infrastructure it provides. So how about broaden the system, thinking around that? But maybe even go one step further and really go to the transformative and ask, how can we connect spaces over water? Can we do that through virtual meetings, 3D printers? Maybe the ages of bridges are gone. Maybe we should have boring companies building a tunnel instead. Maybe we should have electric ferries going over. So why don't we take a step back and ask about the new opportunities? And that was a really interesting journey. And that's also one thing we have in Sweden is that we tend to look at technology and see incremental, disruptive, maybe even transformative technologies, but we seldom go on the market. And that's because we've been classical engineers. You know the thing when Ericsson and the mobile phone said, but look at the specs, our mobile phone is so much better than Nokia. And people said, but I like to use Nokia. But the specs are not there. And so it's all about technology. It's not how you sell that, how the customer experiences that. So that's where we tend to improve the cars, not thinking about car sharing or infrastructure around those things. And that's where we need to do more work. And one example then that I'm going to end with is just Husqvarna, who is an industrial company, I think 350 years old, started as a weapon manufacturing company. Today they are doing gardening equipment. And we work with at Cybercom then with commercial landscaping. I used Husqvarna then sort of brought this thing, and they, as many companies, they were looking at this business, and they saw these trends that most companies see: batteries, digitalization, optimization, urbanization, sustainability. But how did that do anything more than incremental? And they told us that if you're going to do another PowerPoint presentation, or if you're going to do another post-it exercise, we're going to strangle you, because we've had those. But we want to know what we're going to do. Not talk about the visions and all these opportunities, but what are we going to do? And that was when we developed this framework with Cybercom. The last part is Monday morning tasks. So it's not leaving people inspired. I usually say, if you feel inspired, usually you're in a dangerous place. If you feel stressed, but know what you can do, then you're in a good space. And we have very much inspiration in Sweden, very little action-orientated guidance. But what we did then, and just to sum up, was that today they're an equipment supplier. That's what they do. They sell stuff. And when sustainability people come to them, they say, oh, how can you go and make sure that your equipment is reduced to zero emissions? That's when they stop. Go to electric and maybe offset a little bit of what you have here. But they're not saying, why does Husqvarna exist? The customers, where's the customer? And then, of course, for Husqvarna, usually the simple customer is the one who's buying their equipment. But that's not really the customer. The customer is the one experiencing the green space. And what is needed to deliver there? And how can Husqvarna work with that? And that was where they said, okay, so first we need to be better on productivity. We need to see how we can make sure that our equipment is used in a smarter way, not just sell them. Sort of the Xerox, try to sell the service on cut green spaces instead of selling equipment. And then you can start looking at service data provider and saying, okay, so how do we make sure that we actually cut the grass in the way that people actually want it, and how do people experience things? But then move into green space provider, because that's where we need to go. We need to talk with mayors. We need to talk with those who and evaluate our work depending on how people experience these green spaces. And of course, green spaces being one of the most exciting places on the planet when you look at city development. How do people move to work? How do people live their life? That's connected to green spaces. So it's huge revenues opportunity if you don't just look at yourself as a provider of physical goods, but really looking at the values that are attached to that. As an example is that NHS, the British healthcare system, they're giving away these sort of tracking watches because people are have obesity, overweight problems, huge cost for the system. So they're paying people to walk into the green spaces because they know that putting these things on, having competition, is actually reducing. So giving things away is actually helping people save money. So that's where I think having that kind of thinking, and of course it's going from a weapon manufacturing to think about people's health situation. It's a transition. But I think Husqvarna is on the case now. We see these things. But as they do that as part of their core business development, they're not really being acknowledged, and maybe not even want to be acknowledged, because it's not about a PR communication thing. It's about changing the business and really helping their customers and being honest in that discussion. So I think that's just, I wanted to end with that and just, oh, sorry, this was in Swedish. So what they said, the key takeaways was collaborate, sustainability, but what you do Monday morning, they really hooked onto that if you want to do something, you really need to think about doing something, not being inspired. And then do with the least resistance. Start doing things rather than dream about something that might be perfect in the future. So that was a journey from eco-civilization to providing green spaces. Thank you.
So fantastic. Wow, Dennis. Expanding minds, right? Anyone more than I feel a bit slow this morning?
No.
No. No, but it's really, really interesting. I'm always thinking about what boundaries I have in my head with the traditional way of thinking and the traditional way of, I went to business school in the early 90s, and we learned Porter and, a linear way of thinking of business and how the world really is changing, and also what legacy I bring with me in my head with the models and with the framework that we have in society, and the way we're used to doing business and what has been successful and what has not been successful. So really, really important. But do we have any questions here? We've been covering a lot of material. So any questions to Dennis? We have
Yes, I have a question. Thank you very much for a very inspiring presentation here. One of the slides, which is still in my mind, is where you had this shift where during 20 to 30 years were applying the same tools and trying to be best in the old way and so on.
Yep.
Then the next step was to apply the new paradigm. And this is really hard questions. Maybe just comment. Where are we now? Are we in the second phase now?
Well,
Dennis,
really good question. Sorry.
can we just repeat the question
Oh,
for
sorry.
the streaming?
Yeah. So the question was the image about the two phases of transition and the turning point, and the question was, where are we today in that? And of course, that's a simplified graph, and I would argue that we are on the other side in all areas. It's just that with music and entertainment, it's clear that the old industries are gone already. But in transportation, we see Bill Ford now saying that my competition is not within the car industry. It's Uber, it's city planners, it's everywhere. I don't know where I am. So you really have that acknowledgement that where investments are. The problem is that we are there in terms of individual cases, but for most companies, they still look back and cling to that world. And I think you can see political equivalence of that also. Some being confused where we should go, some cling really hard to where we were or thought we were, a dream world long gone, the golden age. So I think we see that in politics even more, that they cling to the yesterday's world. They are among the last to realize that you shouldn't have a ministry of transportation, but of mobility. You shouldn't have all these things that is sort of old industrial way of organizing yourself. But that's also reflected in industry groups, etc., that still organize themselves around those old things. And even, that's where you want to keep things simple and not explaining things to people. And just coming to you, I just wanted to throw out things that I think is, I usually ask people when you talk about your mental image, just test yourself with a few things. Book, first things that comes to mind. Is that a dead forest book or is that an e-book? Office. Is that a physical place or a way of making things being productive, laptop, etc.? So I think just throwing up a couple of ideas where you are mentally, because sometimes we think of ourselves as being really clever and intellectual, but we realize that deep down our intuitive thinking is still back there. And it's not feeling guilty about that, but if we don't recognize that, we're very dangerous, because then we think we're so clever that we need to reflect about what you said. What do I have? What knowledge do I have? And realize that, maybe some of that is not relevant anymore. But that hurts.
And it's difficult. We were talking about change because we need to de-learn, right?
Yeah.
It's not like learning on. We need to erase things that we bring with us. Fantastic. Any more questions? Yes? Please repeat the question. Then.
For the interesting debate and the very nice presentation. I want to ask you a little bit provocative question. How do you know that, or how can we know that digital technologies are more sustainable? Do we have enough evidence? Like if you look at, for instance, blockchain, there are some debates that needs too much energy that we cannot provide. Or if you look at very green technologies that we label as green, like solar energy, which I did a 4-year study on it in Germany. Is it really green or sustainable if you look at the negative externalities, or if you look at the social sustainability, because it actually is maybe good for the rich but not for the poor. Like there could be lots of as actually you also pointed out, that if you look at in a certain context, things looks very sustainable, but if you look at the global context, it is not.
Should I repeat again? So the question is, and I'm so happy they come, because I usually try to end with that and making the point so people don't forget that, is really digital solutions sustainable? We can see a lot of examples when it seems that it's actually part of the problem. And the response to that is, thank you. I tend to end my lectures that way and saying, you might now be overconfident that digital solutions is the solution. It's not. Digital solutions is a catalyst. It can accelerate any development. It's a powerful tool. But most of those can, first of all, being used to improve the old system, making it look slightly better, sometimes even being used to communicate things much more efficient and make people, maybe one of the most unsustainable sort of part of that is Amazon. One-click button, sort of impulse purchasing. Many of the big companies we have today, big retail chains, big clothing companies from Sweden, their whole idea is just sell more things. And of course, they are at the forefront of using digital technology. So I would argue, and we write in the report for the digital roadmap, that today probably overall, digital is part of the problem because it's being used to accelerate bad things. So it's such a powerful tool, and it's really important to not think that the more we use digitalization, the better it becomes. It allows you to do totally new things. But what I would argue is that if you look at a place where people live really good lives 30 years from now, if you remove digital from that equation, you basically have living in caves left. So really being able to read, having 11 billion people to read, if you have dead forest book or any other kind of physical mean for that, that's almost impossible to square that. If you look at mobility, if you think of people flying physically and driving, each having a car, or more, like in the US. It's not just enough planets for that. So it doesn't matter how much ICT you put in the car, unless you sort of take another system approach. So what I tend to say is that you need to think about digital nutrition, digital mobility, digital living, not digital buildings, not digital cars. So we need to move up one system level when we do our assessment. And that's very seldom we do that, because especially here where we are, researchers, they try to drill down. So then it's not even a car, then it's part of an engine that you try to use digitalization for. So, and that's sort of relearning things, that how can we bring back again education on a much more fundamental level? Maybe we need to be more Renaissance people to really understand the broader concept also, and how culture and technology interact and how it's used. So really happy for the question that I was sort of thinking of saving for last.
So maybe we make that a last remark. So thank you so much once again, Dennis, for coming to us.
Thanks for inviting me.
And thank you all for joining us this morning. Hope you had an inspiring and also
what do we even call
morning,
that?
and also made some learnings. I did. Please follow us on social media and for our next coming breakfast seminar in about a month's time. Thank you.